democracy on defense. With President-elect Trump already signaling that he will be using his second term as a revenge and retribution tour, a new initiative is coming together to offer legal, financial, public relations, and even mental health assistance to people who find themselves under attack and in his crosshairs. NBC News reporting that when he takes office again, Trump will preside over a vast law enforcement apparatus capable of leaving those who've crossed him bankrupt, imprisoned, or both. People involved in the effort to try to protect them said. Fending off such investigations can be financially ruinous, even if defendants escape punishment. A legal defense can quickly cross the six-figure mark. Joining me now is Mark Elias, the founder of Democracy Docket and a partner at Elias Law Group. Mark, it's always so good to see you. I just want you to underscore, because you are actively in the trenches, going to court, fighting these battles, so you understand what litigation looks like and feels like. Why is it so important, then, to have protective forces against the improper use and the weaponization of government and investigative power, especially when you look at this incoming administration?
Yeah, sometimes, Katie, I worry that people think litigation is what they see on TV. You know, it kind of begins, it goes to the middle, and it concludes in an hour. And unfortunately, that's not the case, right? These investigations can go on for months and months. They can stretch on to years. And when you have someone like Donald Trump and Kash Patel, who, are in control of the levers of those investigations, it can take not just a financial toll on people, but it can take a reputational toll. It can take a mental health toll. And, it is even if you set the legal fees aside, it is cold comfort to say to people, oh, well, at the end of it, since you did nothing wrong, you'll be okay. Well, the end of it may be months and months. They may have been dragged through the public arena. They may have, seen their jobs jeopardized. So it's really important that now, before he takes power, that we all stand up and say that this is not okay, that this is not something that we're going to normalize, and it is not something we are going to allow him to gain advantage in using.
So one of the last stands that are being taken in terms of the rule of law is happening in a courtroom in New York Monday. Donald Trump slamming New York Judge Juan Merchan after he rejected Trump's motion to dismiss the indictment and to set aside that jury's verdict. Trump claiming, of course, presidential immunity. But, of course, there's still this claim that remains by Donald Trump of juror misconduct. But putting that aside, Mark, with Trump's Georgia election interference case now on the ropes, is Judge Merchan America's last hope for justice?
I'm not sure that we have a hope for justice. I mean, the fact is that Donald Trump managed to game the court system from start to finish here, was able to, through a variety of tactics involving delays and legal arguments and ultimately arguments to the U.S. Supreme Court in a decision that I think will not stand the test of time. He has managed to escape the consequences of the January 6th activity and the events leading up to it. But I think it is fair to say that the only criminal case that remains standing is the one in New York, and so in that sense, yeah, that is the one case that right now might hold him accountable.
So earlier today, Mark, the Senate Judiciary Committee, chaired by Senator Dick Durbin, released a years-long investigation into the ethical lapses at the Supreme Court. Dick Durbin noted, now more than ever before, we know the extent to which the Supreme Court is mired in an ethical crisis of its own making, whether failing to disclose lavish gifts or failing to recuse from cases with apparent conflicts of interest. It's clear that the justices are losing the trust of the American people at the hands of a gaggle of fawning billionaires. Durbin talks about the need for legislative solutions. I mean, Mark, manage my expectations here. Are we now having to put the future of a fair and impartial court and the highest court of the land in the hands of politicians?
Right. So, look, I don't think that there's any chance we're going to see Supreme Court reform as long as Donald Trump is in the Oval Office. But I do think that the Supreme Court did make this situation quite a bit worse for itself. And in addition to the issues that Senator Durbin flagged, I want to flag the fact that the Supreme Court, through a number of its rulings, undermined its legitimacy and its credibility with the American public. It was 30 years ago that the Supreme Court, in another case involving a challenge to Roe versus Wade, the Casey decision, backed away from that cliff. And the majority in that case said that one of the reasons why he was not going to overturn Roe is because it would erode the credibility of the court. Well, fast forward Dobbs, and that's what it did. And it's not just the Dobbs decision, it's a series of decisions that have eroded the Supreme Court's credibility with large parts of the American public. But here's the good news. The Senate also confirmed the 235th federal judge nominated by Joe Biden. And that means that right now there are more judges in the federal level who are nominated by Democrats than by Republicans. So people shouldn't give up on the courts. People shouldn't give up on protecting democracy in the courts. The Supreme Court's not what we hope it would be, but there are a lot of federal judges out there that hear these cases day in, day out that make really important decisions.
And, you know, Mark, I'm sure there's something that didn't escape your notice, because the recent lawsuit that was brought against the Des Moines Register by Donald Trump, it wasn't a defamation lawsuit. So I want to make sure this is very clear. The defamation cases we see with ABC News, with the George Stephanopoulos settlement and others, right? That's a different situation. But Trump is trying something creative, albeit legally defective, which is this idea that there's some consumer fraud that's being perpetrated when people tune in to watch TV or the news. And these are the claims that he's doing. Now, again, it's creative. I'll give him a little bit of credit there, but ultimately legally and facially defective. Your thoughts about this idea that he's going to try to push these alternative theories, legal theories, to try to maybe get them to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, you know, first of all, let's marvel at a moment that Donald Trump is bringing a consumer fraud theory as a legal claim. But look, what Trump is trying to do is to use every legal theory available to him to intimidate and bully his opponents. And sadly, we have seen a number of billionaires and large multinational corporations be willing to be bullied. So it's not a surprise that he's continuing to do that. But what we need right now is for everyone to stand up and have courage. We need everyone to stand up and say, I am not going to back down to this bully. I am not going to let him exert his will through frivolous legal claims, through incendiary posts on social media. You know, we need people to be warriors for democracy, and this is the time for them to prove their mettle.